I'm Darrell.
I'm David.
And we are a gay male couple from Suffolk, and we've been married for 10 years. In terms of the reasons we chose to adopt, I think we'd obviously been together for a long time, and lots of our friends were having children, our heterosexual friends, and most of them were saying that we were very good with those children, and it was fun to be around their families.
We'd seen their families grow and the fun that they were having with their children, and the warm feeling that gave us inspired us to also adopt and to want to have that similar experience ourselves.
I think we chose to adopt rather than to foster because we wanted that sense of having a permanent family straight away. I think we briefly considered surrogacy, but that is a more complicated and obviously more expensive route to potentially go down in terms of creating a family. So we were very impressed with the information that we got from our local authority, and we felt that they were the obvious organisation to go with when it came to pursuing the idea of adoption further.
When we started out on the journey, it felt very much as if we were the first gay adopters ever to go down this route. But when our local authority reassured us that we were hardly trailblazers and that they'd had a rainbow banner in their foyer promoting LGBT adoption, that was a huge reassurance to us as well.
We chose the agency because they seemed very open to LGBT adoption. At that point, we didn't know any other LGBT adopters. We didn't know anybody who'd created a family through adoption or fostering amongst our LGBT friends.
But it did seem like a new, exciting journey that we were embarking on, and certainly the texts and books that we'd read, case studies, etc., definitely reassured us that it was the path that we wanted to set out on.
I think the best points of going through the adoption process were that feeling of not being on your own. So particularly going through our local authority, they had a very clear process that you had to work through. They had a clear timeline that process was going to take. And actually the process itself was relatively quick and for us relatively smooth. So I think the level of thought and organisation behind the whole thing was very reassuring and was one of the best points of going through that particular authority.
The friendships that we developed through the agency and through New Family Social have been incredibly valuable to us, both setting out on the journey and also subsequently with our son. We've maintained those friendships, and it's really enhanced our life and benefited our son as well.
We certainly still are friends with lots of the people that we met during the sort of evaluation and information process, and all of us have had slightly different experiences. But obviously those experiences are shared experiences, and one of the things that you'll need as an adoptive family is to prove the strength of your support network. And going through the process opens up that support network to families who ultimately will look a bit like yours, other adoptive families, whether those families are single parents or heterosexual couples or LGBT couples. All of you have that shared experience, and I think one of the best parts of the process was that while some of the training was quite intense and there's a lot to learn in quite a short period of time, you are going through that with other people, and those other people will become hopefully friends and allies and people that you can lean on in the more difficult parts of the process as you work your way through it together.
It also really does develop the bonds between you and your own family. Sometimes your parents have grown not to expect having grandchildren, and then suddenly when you bring them the idea of adoption and they realise they are going to become grandparents, that can be quite a revelation to them. There is great reassurance obviously available to you from them.
So our son now is 4.5. He was 22 months when he came to live with us. He would have come to live with us a little bit before then, actually, but because I was away with work, we decided to delay the introduction week slightly. We were waiting for quite a long time after having been approved. The total wait for us after the approval panel to the month in which we read our son's report was about a year. And when we've talked that through with other adopters and fosterers and social workers, that is pretty much the longest wait that most of them have heard of. We do know now that when we were in the process, there were too many approved adopters and too few children at that particular point. We were at a particular blip in terms of the availability of children and the number of adopters who'd been approved. Now we know people who are going into their approval panel with potential matches, so we know the whole process is much faster. I think one of our pieces of advice would be to be flexible with the kind of child or children that you're looking for, but also to be honest with your social workers, because they will know you very well as you work your way through the process. And if at any point something doesn't feel right, make sure you question it with your social worker. We certainly stuck to lots of the criteria for the children that we were looking for, but we did have to be a bit more flexible in the end.
Also, to have faith in the system. We waited a year for our match, and at times it did feel as if we were very much bottom of the pile, and we did start to question why that was the case. But in the end, we were matched with who we consider to be the perfect child for us, and it just goes to show that our wait was worth it, and that our social worker had been right in many regards right the way through.
That's comes back to what we were looking for in the first place. So when we were approved for 2 children. We had a slight preference towards 2 boys, and we went through the process with 2 children in mind, aged between sort of 3 and 6, maybe 3 to 5. So in the end, when we saw our son's profile, he was quite outside of the sort of criteria that we'd had in our head to start with. But again, as we've said, having faith in our social worker meant that when we saw his profile, she was already very positive about him as a potential match for us. And we didn't actually need that much convincing, because reading about him and his background and where he was in his life, he did seem to be a much better match for us than perhaps other children that we may have considered at other parts during the time that we were waiting. So I think while we set out thinking of 2 boys, we ended up with a child who was 22 months, but actually he was a much better match for us than 2 children of an older age may have been.
Our social worker did right the way through reiterate repeatedly the fact that 2 children would have been a whole lot more work compared to 1. And I think, having been with our son now for 2.5 years, we'd definitely say that 1 child is definitely easier, although we're still very open to 2 and all the work that's going to bring.
And finally then, in terms of our 3 top tips, I think we would say be honest with your social worker and with yourself, but also be flexible in terms of the type of family that you can picture and the type of children that you can picture parenting who would fit into your family, whose needs that you can meet. Make sure that you're being honest all the way through. If something doesn't feel right, then make sure you say that to your social worker. I think our second tip would be to test your support network. Use the opportunities from the training and through organisations such as New Family Social to broaden your support network to include people who are in similar situations to you, and make sure that you are preparing your family, your friends, your support network for the type of child who is about to come into your life and the different needs that an adopted or fostered child might require compared to a birth child.
Don't be too hard on yourselves would be our tip for number 3. It will be one one of the hardest things you ever do in your life. It will really test your relationship with your partner if you're going through it with a partner. It will make you question yourself, why you set out on the journey in the first place. But it's all a giant learning curve, as it is indeed for any parent. There's no right or wrong answer. You discover an awful lot as you go through, and you can really enjoy the experience because ultimately you've got an addition to your family and a son or a daughter in the process.
So that's our advice. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it, and best of luck with the process. We hope that you enjoy it and that you have an amazing family at the end of it.